Great. Well, thank you for joining everyone today for this session on resumes and brag books that will be presented by Sandy Hild. Sandy is the resume doctor and career coach and located in Houston, Texas. Sandy, if you'd like to get started.
Sure. I think to start off, to tell you a little bit about myself and explain how this process of selling myself began through the development of my own resume and brag book. It was 1985. That was a big year for me. I left Maryland Public Television to come to Houston to learn the resume business. And in 1991, I broke off from a national group and formed my own company. That took a great leap of faith, but I never doubted myself. I've always been the type of person who came in early. I worked late. I put in a lot of effort to make sure I got the job done right. So I was never like an average employee. I excelled at what I did. That was my motivation. And I think that's what we take most for granted. We assume that we're like everyone else when actually we're not. I find that there's probably about 15% of a company where the people really excel. The majority of people are actually just there to do a job, earn their paycheck, go home, and not worry about it. And then you've got that percentage of people who aren't really good at what they do and really should be fired. So how do we, the people who excel, how are we going to make sure that we get credit? I think I was destined to do this work because I look back at the resume I prepared back in the 70s, and I was working for health and mental hygiene at that time. And I look at it, and the front of it was a job description resume because, that's what we did back then. But on the back of it, I had a listing of all the committees I was on, what we were mandated to do, what we actually accomplished, and how it changed the business that we did. That was unusual for back in that time frame. When I moved to Maryland Public Television, I had to continue to refine my resume, and I had to keep track of those contributions. I'm not the most organized person in the world. I know in the concierge business you have to be organized. But I'm more of a writer. I use a different side of my brain probably than you do. And so I like to create binders. I find that file folders for me they get put away and they get lost. And when I had 3-ring binders around me, I could pull from them very easily to have the information accessible. So I would have a 3-ring binder on my membership drives and how much money we brought in and so forth, the spreadsheets that I created. If it was in person with Rick Breitenfeld, I would have a 3-ring binder for that program and the press releases that I wrote and then the clippings from all the publications that actually carried that information. So one day this light bulb went off in my head, and I said, okay, if I have to talk about myself better in my resume, maybe I need to create my own 3-ring binder. And I also have an art background. So in art, an artist never goes in and talks about their artwork without actually having a portfolio. So the two sort of combined, and that's how a brag book for me came about. I knew I had to actually have that information with me in order to better understand myself and therefore better promote myself. I'm becoming a product. And so I track statistics and information about our membership drives. I was there at Maryland Public Television for 7 years. So then in 1985, when I moved to Houston and started in the resume business, I continued to teach people that they cannot take themselves for granted. Their resumes cannot be job descriptions. They have to be able to sell themselves. They have to talk about the contributions they make and how they change an organization. Because if you're just doing a job description type resume, you become a doer, not an achiever. So when I was teaching my people, when I was writing their resumes, it was all about changing their attitude. So that's where we moved to page 2, attitude adjustment and staying competitive. Why is this important? I think no matter what we do, we're in sales. Why is that? Because we have to become our own marketing department. We're in highly competitive roles. I mean, think about when a job posting goes on the internet. They'll get hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants for one position. How do you rise to the top of the list? If you're just talking about yourself like a job description, those job postings that you see, that's going to make you look average. It's going to make you look like everybody else. You're going to be just like the person you replace and the person who comes in and replaces you. That, to me, is a death sentence. Employers want to hire the people who excel. So, why is it when we're growing up that we're taught to brag about ourselves is not a good thing? I don't believe that. I believe that businesses do not hesitate to brag about themselves. They have their own marketing departments that track this kind of information. They don't hesitate to say that they're one of the best in something. We have to be careful how we present ourselves. But still, I don't really think of it as bragging, even though I call it a brag book. I think it's just our role is to educate employers why we are the best person for the job. In order to do that, you've got to know the details. So how do you get better prepared to talk about and promote your product? How do you become a salesperson? Salespeople are just people who spend a lot of time getting to know their product. They spend hours before they ever get in front of their first client. They do a lot of research. They practice their responses. They go over their presentation. They fine-tune it for the needs of that particular client. When you're looking for work, it's the same process. So how do you change your attitude to stay competitive? And why is that important? Because you've got to stay competitive. Like I said before, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people applying for one position. So you can't assume anything with that process. In sales, they never assume anything. They always do their research first. They always know their product and what that product can do for that client so they can talk about it. That's why, it's important. It's your job to be able to promote yourself. Now, the reason I talk about why we create our own glass ceilings, I used to belong to a female organization, female executives. They put out a national magazine, and one of the articles they talked about was, as women, we have a tendency that if there's a project going on, we'll work really hard on that project and miss our lunch with the VP of the company in order to get the project done. And they said that a man would go to lunch with the VP instead, talk about the project he's working on, and then find a way to get the project done. And we as women, men too, all of us, we need to learn that if we don't talk about ourselves, somebody else is going to take credit for what we're doing. So how do you compete and learn to be more effective at what you do? Well, when you do your job, what I want you to start thinking of, what is the problem you face? What is the action you take or actions? And then what are the results that come about from that? So I call that PAR, the problem, the actions, the results. That's key to your tracking what you do. If you work on a project, you've got to keep track of how much money is that project. What's the scope of the project? How do you better tell someone, you describe that process? If it's a venue, how large is the venue? How many people are involved? If it's a fundraising event, what's the goal of the fundraising event? What did you actually sell? That's going to help you when it's time to write your resume, when it's time to talk about yourself, even if it's for a promotion. We think that our employers, we assume, that they know what we're doing. And once again, I think that's the kiss of death. I had a client once who worked in this big company. He had been applying for management roles to move up into management and could never get noticed. He came to me. I interviewed him for 2 hours. I picked his brain and found out the information I needed to do, and I wrote his resume. That resume, once it got into the hands of management, got him a phone call. And they apologized because, once again, they hadn't realized everything they had done, that he had done for them. He got the promotion. He now lives out in Conroe on a lot of property. He's living his dream. He won't assume anything anymore. So you have to learn to change the way you do things. You have to learn to take credit where credit is due, because that's what's going to help you move up the ladder if you want to move up the ladder. And then let's move on to the next page. Okay. Now, some of you, I don't know how many of you have a brag book or a career portfolio. Basically what it is a scrapbook. I mean, it is a scrapbook for your career. I think there's two purposes for it, so it's twofold. One's going to be for your job search. The other's going to be for your annual performance review. Now, if it's for your job search, that's going to be your marketing material. It's going to be a record of your accomplishments. It's going to be very detailed. You're going to keep samples of what you've done. Let's say, for instance, you're involved in a big event and you get this great email from your boss that says, you walk on water. That goes into your brag book. You got to be precise in telling your story. I cannot emphasize that enough. A resume should not be a job description. It needs to tell your story. I'll read a resume, and there's this objective that they start out with. I got one today, and it's all about, I want this, I want that. I almost hear the person saying, I expect you to give me this. That is so wrong. It's getting off on the wrong foot, because a resume is really about the employer. What are the employer's needs, and how do you educate them that you're the best person to help them meet their goals? In order to do that, that's where you have to tell your story. So you need to be talking about how many years experience you have, what industries have you been involved in, what are you known for, how we brand a product. Branding is important. So what if I were to go and talk to people who work with you, what would they tell me about you? Do you create value in what you do? Are you a turnaround expert? Are you the person that everybody goes to take care of problems? How well do you communicate? These are all the details to make it more precise in that replacement of an objective. That's your introduction. But getting into resume writing could be another hour, so I'm not going to go into that part. But then, if you're maintaining that brag book well, it's going to be something that you're going to take to an interview. I think that great salespeople are good educators. Most salespeople have visual aids that they use when they're selling their product. I have been teaching my people since 1985 to never walk into an interview empty-handed. When you're talking about something and you have a document or something in your brag book that could back you up, I want you to use it. It becomes a visual aid. The reason educators use visual aids is because people believe more of what they see than what they hear. They also retain that information more. You want them to remember you. The other thing, it's going to demonstrate how you do your job, especially if training is part of it. Salespeople keep brag books. They're one of the few people that I talk to that are good about doing this because they know how well visual aids work when they're selling a product. So that's one of the things we have to learn. Now, for your annual performance review, if you've been maintaining your brag book properly, and I mean that's daily, weekly, monthly, then when it's time to do your performance review, all you got to do is pull that binder, look at the material, look at your accomplishments, everything will be there, and then it makes it easier for you to assess what you've accomplished and then set goals for the new year. Instead of racking your brain and trying to remember, everything is there for you. So it is a great management tool. It'll help keep you organized. So what's the purpose? The purpose is it needs to be something to help you with your career as far as finding a new job, a new promotion, or helping you in your current job. And it's not just for your performance review. Imagine if you want to go in and get a promotion. You use that brag book to go in and make a better presentation. I was at a conference once for CPAs, and the guest speaker ahead of me was from the University of St. Thomas. Oops. For some reason, my computer went down. Let's see what happened here. But anyhow, she stated that there were more men in the CPA program than women. And she felt the reason for this was because men are just better prepared in talking about themselves. And so one of the things she was talking about was how do we take information about ourselves and go in and convince an employer, because back then I think it was $150,000 a year, $150,000 for the master's program at St. Thomas for CPAs. How do you convince a company to spend $150,000 on yourself? It's for their betterment, and you have to be able to tell them what they're going to get out of it. And part of teaching someone what they're going to get out of it is to show them and explain to them what you've already done for them and how this is going to make it even better. Let's move on to the next page. So what are your accomplishments? What are our contributions? I get so many resumes that are job description resumes. I'm constantly teaching people how to think differently about themselves, how to understand that what they're doing is not part of their job. That's the job description role. How you go in and change a company is they're your contributions. An employer's going to be interested in how can you make me money? I mean, everything is about their bottom line. How can you improve their profit margin? You know, I'll talk to people where safety is extremely important. And, you know, but yet they're not telling someone how that safety has improved under their management. Or even employee turnover. I mean, it costs a company so much money to hire a new person. I've heard that it costs anything from $100,000 to $150,000 per new employee. Now, this is not because of their salary. It is because of all the salaries of the people involved and their time to bring this new person on board, to find them, to advertise, to interview them, to look at the resumes, to interview them, to train them, and then it takes a year, 2 years to get them up to par. That's all time. Time costs us money. So if you can show an employer how you can reduce costs, reduce time, even just changing the way things are organized to reduce someone else's time, you know, what percentage of time has been reduced? How does that equate to money? I mean, I was just talking to a client, and part of what he does is, I mean, it's sales, but he was able to go in and convince a company to spend $200,000 on a piece of equipment because he showed them how quickly they could recoup that money because he could save them. They had like 8 employees. Each one of those employees' time would be cut in half as far as devotion to doing a particular task, which would open them up to be able to do other things. So this piece of equipment, he convinced them, he showed them how it was going, they could afford it, where they didn't think they could afford it before. And that's how you have to think of yourself. How have you improved what you do? So it's the problems you faced, once again, the actions you've taken. How did you solve an issue? What all was involved? And then the results. Now, most people forget about the results, and that's unfortunate. I mean, I'll see where people are talking about things, but once again, they're assuming that I understand what results came about from this. Or, you know, I'll even go to, say, a Chamber of Commerce function, a luncheon, and a politician is introduced, and he stands up in front of the group, and he says, vote for me because I used to manage $400 billion in assets. And I raise my hand, and I stand up and go, well, how well did you manage those assets? And he could not answer that. He was like stumbling over it. He did not expect that. But that's what I want to know, and employers want to know that. And the reason I know this is because I've taken the time over the years to interview the people in hiring positions. And I've asked them, when you read a resume, what are the questions you want answered? What do you want to know about these people? And that's how I've developed the process. That's how I know that they want this information. But don't forget about the results, because that's really what makes the impact. If I, and this is very basic, but this is an example. A job description would be that I ordered and managed supplies. That's very generic, it's very basic. But if I say I took on additional responsibility and ordered and managed $50,000 in supplies annually, I implemented an inventory control system, I ordered in bulk, and I saved the company $10,000 over a 2-year time frame, that's a 10% savings on my annual budget for those 2 years. That's an achiever compared to a doer. That's the difference between an accomplishment or contribution and just a job description. So let's move on to the next page. How do you create a brag book? You know? I mean, what I did with mine, I had 3-ring binders back at Maryland Public Television, so my first brag books were done in 3-ring binders. Now I can go to Office Depot and get a nice 3-ring binder that is in a portfolio. It zippers up and looks like a little briefcase. That's what salespeople carried around. Everything's become more computerized, more automated. Some people keep their brag books in their computers. They'll take their laptop to an interview. It just depends on what you feel comfortable and how technical you are. I still prefer the brag book. I like to see and feel things and handle things. I'm of the old school that if I'm sitting with a client and I let them handle my product, they're not going to want to give it back. They're going to want to take ownership of it. But that's, you want something that's fairly substantial. This is important information. So in it, you're going to have an index system. Office Depot has wonderful resources for this. You want to have business card holders to put in the back, and then you want lined paper. The lined paper is important because you want to work on this daily, weekly, monthly. As you're working on a project, you want to keep track of how much was it, and what specifically you're doing with that project, because you don't want to have to remember it later. People forget the details. I'll be interviewing people, and they won't know this information. They have to go back and do research. Hopefully they can find the information. Most of the time they can't. That is not good when we're trying to promote them. You want to have that information, and I do not like to fudge information. I do not like to make up stuff. I don't like to say it was approximate. I would rather say it's definitely this amount. But sometimes you have to do that. The automated system, that's something that if you put it in your computer, I don't want you having things in umpteen and 1 million file folders, and then you've got to spend 2 hours trying to find everything. It should be all organized under one main file that's called your brag book with sub-files under it. Easily accessible, because when it's time to update your resume, you want that information. If you're getting ready to go on an interview, you want that. If you're going in to talk about your annual performance review, you want to review this information. That's all important to you. Now, what do you include in your brag book? We've talked about this before, but, it's everybody's brag book is different. It depends on what you do, but it's spreadsheets, it's anything you're tracking, flyers you create. If you're doing an event, like I said earlier, you wanna, if you create a flyer for it, you want that in there. You want to take photos of the event. Get creative. You're trying to maintain material that's going to help you tell a story in the future. Now, will you take all this information to an interview? Probably not. You're probably going to downsize it. Mine are 4 inches thick, but if I go on an interview or I'm using it, I look at what purpose I'm using it for, and then I'll pull certain things and make a smaller version of it. But everything that I have is still there. And believe me, I'm like I said, I'm not the most organized person in the world. I hate to file. But I have material that goes back into the 70s because of these portfolios. Information that I would not have if I had not done this. And when you leave a company, if you don't have this material, it's lost. You cannot go back and get it. And later on, we're going to talk about the importance of where to keep this, because that's important as well. But, you know, if you create a web page, you know, unless you got your laptop there and you can control and go to the web page and show them, I want you to have copies of that website in your brag book if it's in a 3-ring binder, so that you can show that to them. And you work this information into the interview very carefully. If I'm in an interview and I'm talking about the level of customer service that I perform, and I have actual thank you notes from my customers, like testimonials, you know, on my website, that's when I want to present that, to make that point. So it's not only having the material, but it's learning how to slip it in to make a better point in that presentation, which is your interview. Remember, you're selling a product. So if you're selling yourself on your special events at that point, then you need to be in the special event section of your portfolio or brag book and, you know, turn it upside down, learn how to work with it, learn how to turn to things, learn how to open it up, take something out. Hand that thank you note to the interviewer so they can read that information. It's like you took that person with you to the interview. It's going to make much more of an impact than if you were just a talking head sitting there making a statement. How do they know that that's actually the truth? How do you convince them? It's all about convincing the employer that you're the best person for the job. If you do training classes, I think it's important, or you're a guest speaker, videotape it. Have photos also, still photos, of you giving a presentation that show you before a group. I think that's very important. You know, if you've done if you've developed this more computerized, it's the same thing. You're going to have that laptop. You're going to learn to use certain things in the interview from, you know, the information you've put in there, the flyers, the photos, the charts, the graphs, the letters that have been written, you know, the volunteer work you've done, whatever is relevant at the time, that's what you're going to zero in on, and that's what you want in the brag book. So let's go on to the next page. And how do you maintain a brag book, and why do you maintain it? I think it's important to do it daily, weekly, monthly. And the reason I say that is because time flies. I mean, look, we're in August already of 2014. Before we know it, winter's going to be here. So, you know, if we don't make, then if we don't make time, then it's going to get biased. And when time gets by, we can't go back and make it up. And it's harder. I mean, if you're not doing something on a regular basis, it's harder to catch up. So that's why I think the lined paper in your brag book is really important. You fill that out as you're going along. You update the material. You're pulling documents from other areas. You're copying it. You're have a binder that has a slot in it. Slide that material down into the slot. Fill out the lined paper. Then maybe weekly or monthly go in there and actually start putting it in the certain sections it needs to be in. But I think it's important to maintain it because you don't want to have to go back and catch up. You don't want to try and rack your brain about any of this type of information. I can't emphasize that you are your own marketing department. I mean, one time I used to work downtown, and one time I used to ride the bus, and I would get on it late at night. It was dark outside. I met this really nice gentleman who worked in the oil and gas industry, but he was an accountant. And he was telling me that he was getting wind that something was happening in his company, and so I started talking to him about what was he doing to update his resume and so forth. And he kept telling me, I don't have time for that. Our company is in the process of being acquired. And I said, well, what are you doing to protect yourself? And he said, well, not much. So then I kept running into him, and we would talk about things, and he told me how people were going and getting interviews, and this, that, and the other. 6 months went by. Next thing I know, I see him, and he's got this really sad look on his face, and he told me he lost his job. In that 6 months, and it flew by for him, he didn't do anything for himself, and he saw other people doing things for themselves, but he let that time slip away and didn't do anything. And what he said to me is, where did all my hard work for the company get me? And I thought that was a very interesting question. So I think it's important that you use your day timer, set time aside for yourself, even if it's a half an hour, but make sure you do that. Make sure that that's part of your schedule to make time for yourself. You have got to do this. You have got to learn that keeping this information is vital to you being able to better promote yourself and educate an employer why they should hire you and not your competition. That's why bragging becomes important. Now, where do I think you should keep it? This might sound strange, but I really think you should keep it in your car. Some people will keep it in their office. I don't like that idea because jobs, we're not assured that we're going to have our jobs tomorrow. And if there's a layoff, if there's a downsizing and you're called to a conference room or something's happening with your job, you're not going to have access, possibly, to your desk. They're going to go and pull what they think is personal and give it to you. They may think that that information that you've put in your portfolio or brag book is not yours. They may think it's theirs. So I suggest you keep it in your car. Why in your car? Because we have cell phones today. How is an employer going to call you? They're going to call you on your cell phone. When an employer calls you on your cell phone, you want information accessible to you if you need it. One of the things that I also teach is a job search binder. I haven't said anything in here about this, but the job search binder is something that I think you should keep in your car too, because if XYZ Corporation is calling you, you want to be able to open that binder, be able to look up XYZ organization, know what the job title was, know something about the company and how you found out about the job. It's not a good thing to say now, what position is this or what company is this? That's not, salespeople would never do that. You have got to be able to make that person realize that you're on top of everything. You never want to lose either one of these books. It's important. You never, if you go in an interview and somebody said, would you let me have this book overnight to let me look at it? And you just say, no, I'm sorry, I can't let it out of my sight. This is information that's vital about my past. If you want to make copies of something, I'll gladly do that and get that to you. But this has to leave with me. And the reason I say that is because over the years, I know people who have left it and they've never gotten it back, or very seldom do they get it back. People lose things. I made the mistake of giving my girlfriend some of the best photos of my animals. She was going to do something for me, and she's really organized, and she lost all my photos. I can't get those back. This information that you have, you cannot get it back. You have got to maintain the control over it. So keep it in your car, keep it at your home office, but do not keep it in your work office, because you may not have access to it if something happens to your job. Let's move on to the next page. Using your brag book. I think we talked about this a little bit before. Your resume. Okay. Your resume has got to talk about you as an achiever, not a doer. So it's not a job description any longer. So when you read the job description statement, if it's your job to organize special events, then you break it down. What are the events that you organize? Maybe you want to talk about some specific events and how much, of a budget you had, how many people attended, what were the catering events. There's a lot that is involved in an event. You can't tell everything, but you want to at least, it's sort of like fishing. I guess that's a good analogy. If you're going to go out and fish, you have to have a certain kind of lure. You've got to be able to attract a certain kind of fish. And that's what a resume is. So you're not telling them everything. You're just giving them a few bites so that it's going to get them interested and make them ask you questions so you can further talk about it. So you're learning to use the information that you tracked in your brag book to create a more powerful marketing tool. You've got less than 10 to 15 seconds to get someone's attention. Actually, I need to backtrack because since the advent of the Internet, we now have these ATS systems. So whenever you write a resume, you've got to take the time to tweak it. You've got to go in and look at the job posting and highlight keywords and make sure that your resume reflects those same keywords, because that's what's going to make your resume pop out of the system at the other end. So once you pop out, then it's going to be visually read. Now this is where the words that you put down and the story that you tell is going to be vital to making you rise up to the top of the list. And that's where you're going to go and use your brag book. You're going to use the details. So instead of being generic, like a person in sales, they consistently met or exceeded plan. I don't want to know that. I want to know that a person generated $4.279 million for this one particular product line that they carried over 11 years, that they achieved as high as 154% of plan in fiscal year 2012 to 2013, that they averaged over 6 years 112%, and over the last 3 years 125%. I don't know if that's exact figures. I'm trying to just give an example. That's all information that comes from your brag book. And then getting ready for your interviews. Boy, I can't tell you how many people I talk to that do not do this. And it's just part of the puzzle. And it's an important part of the puzzle. Think about sales reps. Sales reps put hours of work into getting ready before they ever sit down in front of a client. They're going to understand their product. They're going to know how to talk about their product. They're going to understand something about that client and what their needs are, so they know what to talk about. The interview is so vital. And in sales, it's not only being prepared, but you have to be able to educate that client. And to me, the client is the employer. You're a job search candidate. They're the employer, but they're also a client, and you're the product you're selling. A good sales rep is going to educate that buyer why they are the best product to help that client meet their goals. And in doing that, you have got to use visual aids. You cannot do it by just being a talking head. If we went through a school system where all the teachers were lecturers, we would not be where we are today. And that's because visual aids help in the learning process. We retain more of what we see than what we hear. So in an interview, you've got to learn to use that brag book and the information in it. You have to demonstrate how you've done your job and how it's vital to the success of your company to get them to buy your product. You're trying to get hired. You're trying to convince a company to spend a lot of money on you. Think about if you had your salary every year to go out and buy a new car. You could buy a luxury car every year. That's what an employer is spending on you. That doesn't include the cost it takes to hire you. That's a huge investment. So here you've got a resume that's got to convince them. Then you've got an interview that's got to convince them to spend a lot of money. You have a job to do, and that job is to educate them why you are the best person for that job. So you want to utilize everything that's available to you. You want to know how to talk about your product. You want to know what you've done that's relevant to them, that you've contributed to other companies. Because you don't want to be talking about the kitchen sink if they're interested in a refrigerator. Nothing turns an employer off than talking about something that's not relevant to them. So that's part of the preparation. So ahead of time, you want to find out what they need. You know, if you don't know, then try and figure that out before you actually start the interview. And this is a good time for me to interject this, even though we are getting short on time, because I think it's important. What's the first thing you do when you walk into an interview? Yes, you introduce yourself, but I don't think you want to immediately jump in to talking about the job. I think it's really important to take it to a more personal level. So what I want you to do is look around their office and see what personal effects they have. Are there any photos? Are there any awards? I walked into an interview once and there was nothing. I mean, nothing on the desk. I mean, this man was so organized. And I figured, well, he's a company man. So I started talking about the company, and I got him to tell me a lot of information. I mean, I was in that interview for 45 minutes. When I walked into the second interview, he couldn't get over the fact that I'd been in there. Of course, the first thing I did with him was there was 2 photographs on the wall, and it was this huge rock formation with this person on it, and it looked like him. And all I said was, is that you in that photograph? And he proceeded to tell me about these rock formations that are in Denmark, how that's him, how that's his favorite place to go visit, how he started his career as a geologist. And he looked at me and he goes, now I know why you were next door for 45 minutes. Now, I didn't say anything about the fact that there's nothing in there to talk about, that I got him to talk about the company. But still, I created a more personal relationship before we ever started talking about the job. And I think it's very relevant to selling yourself. The number one reason why people buy is because they like their sales rep. How do you get someone to like you? I had a great boss who could raise millions of dollars in 21 days of fundraising, on PBS. I would follow him around a room when he was talking to people, and I watched him, and he would just ask them questions about themselves and get them to talk about themselves, and they all loved Bob. So I think that's a key to starting an interview that I just wanted to interject here, and then make sure that you carry that throughout the interview. Find out what they want. I think it's also important in the interview to find out and to ask questions what their process is. What are they going to do to follow up? When is it going to happen? When are they going to make a decision so that you know how to follow up on the interview? I think we can move on to the next page. Networking. Now, I know you guys network a lot. I don't think I have to talk about this very much. Probably one of the main points I want to make is networking is vital to your job, not only what you're currently doing, but to your future. I believe that we're part of a high wire act the whole time we're working. Our job is to get to that other side, to that other platform without falling off that wire. That other platform is our retirement. I can't tell you how many people I talk to that have concrete under them because they don't work at any of this. They don't keep a brag book. They don't know how to talk about themselves. They don't have a network. They don't have mentorship. Well, if you are part of an organization and it gets acquired, you're going to be pushed off that wire and you're going to fall. You're going to fall into concrete. And it's bad enough that you're without a job, but, the more people you know, Hillary Clinton, I don't always like to quote politicians, but Hillary Clinton years ago said it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to get a job. You cannot do this by yourself. I used to belong to an organization called the Goodbye Lone Ranger Club. It was to develop the attitude that we cannot do this by ourselves. We need other people. And so, mentors are people, I think everyone should have between 10 and 20 mentors, not one or two. These are people who are in your industry who you admire. Now, they can have 5 years experience, they can have 10, they can have 20, they can be in your current same role as you're in, they can be just above you, they can be where you see yourself 10 years from now. But these are people that you should be able to pick up the phone, they know you, and you can ask them for their advice. You always want one-on-one meetings with these people. You meet them at Starbucks, treat them to a cup of coffee. If they have a busy schedule, you take them lunch. But you want to meet with them periodically. You want to get to know them. They need to get to know you over a period of time. And I mean by time, I mean months, years, so that eventually down the road they feel comfortable saying, you need to hire this person because of the reputation that they have learned about you through knowing you. Organizations are really important, but I don't mean just join them. I mean get involved. You want to be the person who standing up introducing the speaker because you want people to know who you are, not just to go there and not just to be a networking shark. You're not there just for yourself. You're there to better the organization, to help people in the membership, and eventually it comes back to you. Now, brag books in the next generation. I think it's important to get your kids involved in doing the same thing that I've talked about here with you. I've been working with graduate students I've been working with kids now trying to go into college. They have got to write about themselves, and they don't know where to start. I think if you can get them to create a brag book for themselves, and it comes to time for them to write, essays for their applications, they're going to have to write essays for scholarships. I think if they have the brag book, it gives them a visual aid to go to give them material to write about. Otherwise, they're sitting there trying to think of what to write about, and it's a difficult process. I just helped a young girl who was applying. She got into Baylor University, but she was applying for a scholarship, and she was writing about her leadership skills. Well, I know Courtney. She was talking very generically about, I know how to lead people. I'm good at organizing. Those are empty words to me. They don't mean anything if you're not telling me that information is part of a story. Well, I knew she had created an organization at her high school back when she was a sophomore. They had over 40 members. They go out into the community. They help the elderly. They help the poor. They do all kinds of things. And I said, Courtney, this is what you need to write about. You need to talk about your skills, but then you need to tell the story of this organization and what you've been able to accomplish. And she did that, and she was one of the kids awarded a scholarship through the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. So that's why I think it's important for kids to keep this kind of information as well. And I think now might be a good time for us to break and take some questions.
I was wondering, I've heard the term CV used, and was wondering if you could clarify that.
Resumes should only be 1 or 2 pages, no more than 2 pages. It's a misnomer that you should always keep it to a 1 page. A curriculum vitae can be lengthy, but a curriculum vitae is used when a person has publications, has a number of presentations. It's used by professors, a lot of people in the medical field who've been published. I wrote a resume for a professor at Rice University involved in women's studies. She has a curriculum vitae that's 12 pages long. But, a curriculum vitae is, it would depend. Let's say you're a concierge who has been in the industry a long time. You're someone that when people are writing articles, they come to you and you're quoted in articles. Let's say that with a group of other people, you have some publications you've written, you've gone to conventions and given speeches, then you would qualify to bump yourself to a curriculum vitae. But, the most of us who are, we just do a normal job, 1 or 2 pages and a basic resume is about all they want. And you never put references on a resume. I can't tell you how old school that is. References need to be on their own page, and they're only submitted once somebody asks you for them.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Carol.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for all your help and for getting me this.
Well, you're welcome. I wanted to make a point to everybody, with our ticket sales that we handle, or like with Polly with your hotel rooms, it's good to track and keep track of those sales, particularly if there's a big draw like Book of Mormon or Lion King. It's good to be able to say, because of my promotion with my clients, I sold $15,000 worth of Lion King tickets, or whatever it is. So those are good highlights to keep track of, and that's stuff that we could just keep track of in the brag book.
The other thing I would suggest is, before an event like that comes about, think about a projection. what do you actually want to raise? You may want to look at a previous year's event and maybe a 15% increase over that to give yourself a goal. And then you can say with those ticket sales, it was actually 105% of your goal.
Okay. Great.
Employers like to know that we all can set goals and work towards them and achieve them and exceed them, no matter what we do.
Very nice. Yeah, I wrote down one of your quotes that I liked a lot. It was, don't hesitate to brag. You are educating employers while you are the best person for the job. I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a necessity. I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands. I mean, years ago, before the Internet came about, the Houston Chronicle would publish a job for pharmaceutical sales role. They would get over 2,000 faxes. Can you imagine?
Wow.
One job. Now with the Internet, I mean, they're inundated with paper. Of course, it's all in the ATS system. But that's why it's becoming even more relevant to know how to talk about yourself and how to be better prepared. Some people will say, well, don't worry about that in the beginning. You don't really need to go in that kind of detail. You'll be able to do that in the interview. Not anymore. I mean, because you've immediately, you've got to make it through that ATS system. You got to make it through the viewing. I mean, they may only look at 200 resumes, and then out of those 200, you got to get into the top 10 or the top 15. It's a process. One of the things that I think is a resume, that's a different attitude from resume. I think a resume is one of the most important documents you'll prepare in your lifetime because it affects your earning power. But yet today, most people are just throwing something together. They do it last minute. It's a job description. To me, every time you miss an opportunity, that resume just costs you 1 year's salary for that particular job. It's very costly to not know how to talk about yourself when you miss opportunities.
Very nice.